You all made it, considering it's not spring break. I just found out. I'm glad you're here.
I can do that too.
Yeah, you can. I don't know. Most of you know John Shields. He's been a paramedic here for a very long time. Also a deputy with CCSO, and also one of the paramedics with Thames. Drew Russell is here as well, who is an EMT with Thames and patrol officer with Vancouver Police. Also, Aaron Edwards with Crisis Services is here as well. What we wanted to do, the whole goal with this program today was to talk about the integration and what happens when we respond to mentally ill, specifically patients that are suggesting or threatening suicide. And Aaron's going to be here to kind of talk about what happens from the crisis side of things and how they get involved, and then how law enforcement gets involved with that. I'll also touch a little bit on what happens at the dispatch side, which is basically pretty simply from our standpoint, if somebody calls dispatch threatening suicide, as long as there hasn't been any injury, life threat that's happening, threat to another individual, the call gets referred to crisis immediately. So typically by the time we deal with this situation, it's usually gone through a process of steps before it really eventually gets to us. So anyways, enough of that. I'm gonna let these guys talk more about it as we go along. John's also gonna, in the interim, we're gonna give a brief rundown on the Thames program, how it functions, how we interact with Thames. John's gonna briefly touch on less lethal rounds, which a few cases of them have been deployed lately, and some of them have been on the national news as well. And then we'll delve into the suicide stuff after that. So thanks for coming. Any questions before we get started? No? Groovy? All right. Thanks, John.
All right, can you hear me? Oh man, that's really loud. We'll put that down here. Okay. So, like Mark said, if I don't sit down, I'll like pace back and forth. So, and I'm gonna do, holy cow. Sound like I'm in an auditorium. So, and I'm gonna do my very best not to use any four-letter words, which I happen to use on night shift. So, like Mark said, I'm gonna talk a little bit about the, I know, this is crazy. I'm going to talk a little bit about our Thames program, what it is, what we do, and how we serve you guys and law enforcement at the same time. I'm going to go a little bit over less lethal platforms real quick, because they've been kind of in the news and everything, and so kind of some EMS considerations for less lethal and what it is. And then the biggest thing is I'm going to do a little education on the changes that have occurred in law enforcement when it comes to suicidal response or even just mentally ill. Clearly, I'm sure that you've seen in the field a very change in the paradigm on what law enforcement does for you when it comes to mentally ill and suicidal. And so we decided it was probably time to explain why those changes happened and how those changes happen, and kind of how we're working through that. So TEMS is really different depending on where you're at. You go to any other team, any other county, any other department, and it's going to be different. It's literally however that team or that jurisdiction decided to build their team. So, but what the National Tactical Officers Association says TEMS is that it's the pre-planning, preventative care, medical treatment rendered during mission-driven, high-risk, large-scale, extended law enforcement operations. And then the TEMS scope of practice includes medical interventions that further the health and safety of that. So basically it just says that we provide medicine in this specific environment, no place else really. So try to adapt sound medical practices with police tactics. So one of the things that I'll go over a little bit later is TEMS and law enforcement has a very competing objectives. So, oh, thank you for turning that down. You know, typically when EMS goes to a call, that's the problem. Whether it's a cardiac arrest, breathing problem, whatever, that's the problem. But where we work, it's typically a tactical problem. It could be a barricaded person. It could be somebody that needs to be arrested, somebody that we're going after. Somebody gets hurt, that's kind of just a sideshow. And it's really the tempo of the operation on whether or not that has to stop to take care of that injury or whether it's mission driven. So TEMS was formed initially in somewhere around 89, 90 was the very first class of what was called TEMS. So back then it was a lot of military guys that were doing it. This was written by Richard Carmona. He was the Surgeon General for a little while and one of the guys really big into TEMS. But you can see, you know, when he wrote that in 2003, and that after TEMS been around for 15 years, even in 2003, we were still just kind of in our infancy in what we were doing. So some milestone in TEMS on kind of things that pushed us forward as a discipline. Originally in the early 90s, it was literally just some EMTs or cops, you know, providing typical PHTLS trauma care in a hot zone. Used just traditional EMS practices or the military practices that they had at the time, but still, if you knew that the early 90s, the military practice was just basic EMT, you know, Band-Aids and call a helicopter. The medical doctrine in the military hadn't changed from literally the Vietnam War until the early 90s. 1993 was the Battle of Mogadishu. It was the Rangers, 18 Rangers killed and a bunch of them hurt. And they did a retrospective study looking back at that and Vietnam wounding, trying to figure out what went wrong and what they could do better. And again, that's when they realized that they hadn't trained their combat medics for combat the way that it's going to be. You know, they were literally using typical civilian pre-hospital mindset. So in 1996, the Tactical Combat Casualty Care and Special Operations paper was written, and it was largely ignored. But 97 had the Hollywood Bank shootout. That was kind of a turning point for civilian EMS and law enforcement, along with the 99 Columbine high school shooting, because what happened was people were hurt. It was an ongoing operation, and yet medical care did not get to them for a long time. In the North Hollywood shootout, after the one man was shot and detained by police, it was 45 minutes between the time that he was shot and the time that he actually died or got care. And what they found is that's just becoming unacceptable. So obviously the Columbine High School shooting not only started to change the mentality of how we're going to deliver medicine, but clearly changed the mentality of law enforcement. Whereas in the past it was always surround, contain, and call SWAT, what we were finding is in these rapidly unfolding, now called active shooter, active threat situations, that you don't have the time to wait and call SWAT. That law enforcement needs to resolve that problem very quickly. So 2001, the war on terrorism started. So if you've studied any bit of history when it comes to medicine, war is always good for medicine. You get huge leaps and bounds in medical care when any time a war comes along, as far as trauma care. So 2005, 2006, wide acceptance of TCCC within the military. Special operations had been doing it since the early 2000s with really good outcomes. And so right around 2006, the guy in charge of the Army said, hey, we're going to use TCCC Army-wide and see if we can save lives. 2005, CAT Tourniquet comes out. 2006, Combat Gauze comes out. And that's the Combat Gauze that's being used now. That's not the first generation of the powder quick clot stuff. So that's actually the Combat Gauze that really does work well. And then 2008 through 2014, true evidence-based impact on preventable deaths and point of wounding care, where the military could literally look at data and says, yeah, we saved lives because we did this. So, and again, every team is different in its structure. It really depends on where you start. There's EMS-based teams. So there's a rescue ambulance. Cypress Creek EMS in Texas is one of the longest standing teams around. They were formed in the late 80s, like 89, 90. And then there's fire-based. Canby Fire Department has a complete tactical EMS unit. Portland Fire Bureau has, I believe, 30 tactical medics that are trained in TCCC and have a little bit of an advanced scope of practice. So, law enforcement base, U.S. Border Patrol is a good example. They have what's called their BOR-STAR program, which are all paramedics, and they're specialized in search and rescue, and water rescue, and a whole plethora of things with the Border Patrol. Most of the federal agencies are all law enforcement based, and then we here are law enforcement based. And then whenever somebody's looking at a team, the question always comes up: armed versus unarmed. Which is better? You know, which is worse? You know, honestly, I really don't have an opinion. It's just different. You know, a law enforcement based team can provide their own security, whereas an unarmed team would need some level of security, or you take on some level of risk. So, the types of TEMS that you might see, this is what typical, when somebody says TEMS, tactical EMS, this is typically what people think of. Urban TEMS, urban, you know, the downtown city SWAT teams. So, you know, this is a lot of what we do. You know, we don't have a lot of outside area where we would go, but you know, we're medics that are embedded with our team. Rural TEMS, again, you got the BOR-STAR program, U.S. Border Patrol. This was interesting. I was doing some training in Utah. Davis County, Utah, you have to be a paramedic before you can even apply to be a sheriff. So I thought that was, because they are pretty much the first response in some of the areas in Utah. The patrol car was pretty cool. He had a cage car on one side, had a wall. He opened up the other door, and he had his Life Pack 15, his trauma case, his med kit, and everything. And so yeah, you know, imagine having to go to paramedic school and before you could even apply to be a sheriff. So overseas TEMS, or TEMS outside the continental United States, there's a lot of contract type work. You know, civilians contracted to the military. I love these guys. You know, these yeah, the men in black. Personal security specialists. So I got this off the internet the other day. So they're advertising for a personal security specialist, which is an advanced EMT. And you read down here, this is my favorite. Must qualify with a Glock 19, M4, M203, M2, you know. Imagine a paramedic that has machine guns and grenade launchers. You know, that's not a bad gig right there. So, event TEMS, this is becoming a little bit more important, and you see this a little bit more. You know, we see this, obviously, the one picture is the Boston Marathon bombing. The other pictures are of Election Day or Inauguration Day protest. This one, as you see, is literally down on Southeast Water Street in Portland. That's how I spent Inauguration Day, or a couple of us. So, you know, large-scale event type that, where it's rapidly unfolding, is really not the place you want to be parking your ambulance or your truck. And so that's where we provide that link. Recently, we just had a rally in downtown Vancouver, and so there was a couple of us tasked just as a medical QRF, quick response force, in our own vehicle, so that if needed, we could go into the crowd, get an injured person, and bring them out. So I don't think this is going to work, but we'll see. This is one of the difficulties we had, is getting our videos to work. And what's that? But what this video, it shows, and this was actually down in Portland, and they're using pepper spray, and so, you know, it's basically a small skirmish line, but that line moves. It'll move a couple of blocks at a time. It'll go up a block, down a block, back a block, retreat, give up, go back, and so it's a constantly moving battle wherever the crowd moves. And so it's not really a good place, you know, to think about where you're going to stage assets, because, you know, I'll tell you, you know, you got these guys on foot, and all of a sudden a big black truck with side rails will swoop in. They'll jump on and leave, and now you're there by yourself. So, you know, event stuff like that. So, again, we try to adapt sound medical practices during the unfolding law enforcement. Again, competing mission objectives. So, you know, what takes priority? Is it the mission, because it's a hostage rescue, and, you know, we're going to put a lot of risk into the gain, or is it a drug warrant where the guy's selling, you know, some dope out of his house and somebody gets hurt? Now, you know, you have to weigh the importance of the injury as opposed to the objectives of the meeting. Something else I'll cover a little bit later is what's called, we work on a model called the priority of life, which is very different from traditional EMS as far as triage, and the worst patient gets the most resources. So a model we work on is a little bit different. Diagnostic uncertainty, you know, if it's dark in the back of a piece of armor and you got no light, and, you know, maybe you're working off a flashlight or a red light, you know, or try using a stethoscope in a helicopter, or, you know, in the back of a pickup truck. So, you know, diagnostic uncertainty is always there. You know, I honestly, I haven't carried in my pack, I haven't carried a blood pressure cuff for years, because one, I just don't have the space, and two, I probably wouldn't be able to use it in the environment I am. But as long as they have a radial pulse, which is similar to what our protocol is, then they're not in shock, or they're not as bad in shock and not going to need fluid, which goes along with limited resources. Sometimes the only resources I have is an 8x8 pack that's on my vest, and that's it. I've got to take care of my patient out of that medical kit. So one of the things we've done is every person on our team has their own blowout kit, their own medical kit. They'll have their own tourniquet, their own trauma dressing, their own combat gauze, and the key is we use their stuff on them first before we deplete the stuff that's on our vest. So, and then performance decrement under stress, it's been pretty well proven that as heart rate goes up, you know, tactile motor skills, fine motor skills go down. And so, you know, if you're in the back of an armor or hiding behind a house because somebody's shooting at you and you're trying to take care of one of your officers, you know, that's an event that could lead to a bit of stress. So our core competencies, what we work on, we use the Committee on TCCC and the Committee on Tactical Emergency Care Casualty Guide methodologies. So it's the care under fire, tactical field care, and CASEVAC models. So March priorities of resuscitation, a little bit different. I know that Joe kind of worked on the XABCs, which is exsanguinating hemorrhage, ABCs. For us, March is massive bleeding, then our airway, then our respirations, circulation, and then hypothermia. So remote assessment and surrogate care, a little bit different from what traditional you'd think about. Imagine if what we call providing medicine over a barrier. You know, you're talking to somebody that's barricaded and they're having some type of medical event. When Corporal LeBlanc was shot in 2006, the hostage was also shot and remained hostage. I know, hostage. Yeah, we'll go with that. It's a good story. So you know, so imagine having to explain or provide an explanation to your hostage taker on how to provide at least some basic wound care or medical care to his hostage that he just now shot, because of course he's not going to give him up. So rescue, mobilization, and extraction, we work a lot on officer rescue, what we call immediate action drills. It's practiced during our missions. Medical mission planning is probably the biggest feather in our hat. Because of a lot of what we do, we're allowed the opportunity to pre-plan. You know, the easiest way to explain this is if I said to you, there's going to be a 3-car collision at Andreessen and SR 500 at 5:30 tonight, go ahead and set up all the resources you want and do your planning. You know, that's kind of what it would be like. You know, we know where it's going to happen, when it's going to happen, what resources are going to be used, you know, what the method is, and so we can actually build a plan based on that mission. We do medical mission planning even for our training. So when we go to the range, there is a pre-planned, you know, who's going to be the load and go drivers. If we call EMS, who's going to be the flagger for EMS. If we have to call Life Flight, who's setting up the LZ. And there's names attached to all of these. And they know that that's their mission, that's what they do. So, force health protection and environmental factors. I've probably spent the last 10 years putting more Band-Aids on SWAT guys than more patients I've ever seen. So, and they will. Once you get with a team and you're working with that team, no different if it's your truck or engine crew or your ambulance crew. I mean, that's your team, you know, and they come to you and say, hey, I need a Band-Aid, I need something to help me out. You know, well, you give them a Dora the Explorer Band-Aid. Legal aspects of TEMS. One of the things we try to keep up on a lot, and it'll be a little bit more apparent in the later PowerPoint, is the changing legal aspects of, you know, why we provide care, when we provide care. You know, it's quickly becoming a fact that if law enforcement is going to use force, they better have a plan to provide care. And so that's kind of what we're molding into. So, and then familiarization with tactical operations. So, you know, we train with the SWAT guys, we train with our mobile response teams, so we know what they're going to do when they do it, and so we can better anticipate what they're going to do. It has become the standard of care for special operations. As I said, it's the right thing to do. You know, if there's the potential that we can break things and hurt people, we really should have a plan to provide care for them. So, the other thing is casualties crush momentum. You know, you're in a specialty team, and first guy goes through the door and goes down, you know, that's a huge psychological hit to that second guy. Do I step over, keep going? Do I grab and drag out? You know, he's got to make that instantaneous decision. One of the things we're lucky at is you get a good TEMS program that's well trusted by your operators. They have that psychological knowing that we're there to provide that care, and so they can continue with their mission with knowing that that guy, their buddy, is going to be taken care of. And again, medicine can't necessarily be allowed to drive tactics. What we provide to the incident commander and the SWAT commanders is the information. They have to make their own independent decision based on that situation. So, Our team was established in 1999. It is a law enforcement-based team. So it's recognized by the Law Enforcement Council as a standalone team. Our SWAT's very unique in the way that it is structured. So when most people say, hey, think of SWAT, they think of the guys all dressed up in black, kicking doors and running through houses. Our SWAT has five arms on it. It's got the tactical guys, and that's what they do. We also have our crisis negotiation team, canines, Metro Explosive Disposal Unit, and then TEMS. All 5 standalone teams that work independently but train cohesively so that we can work together. Members are from Vancouver PD, the SO, and then smaller agencies. Right now we're slotted for 8 medics. So 3 from CCSO, 3 from VPD, and 2 from the smaller agencies, which would be like Ridgefield, Battleground, the center. Vancouver Police is the host agency, so basically everything goes to them, and they provide all logistical support for the teams themselves. We are a Washington State ALS EMS supervisory agent, so we're affiliated with ourselves, and we have both EMTs and paramedics. Our mission statement: providing support to any agency by training, developing medical threat assessment, risk assessment, coordinating operations, local EMS. So pretty much if any agency calls and says, hey, we're going to do this thing, we'd really like some medics to hang out with us, then they call the commander calls the TL, and the team leader says, hey, we need to dedicate some resources to this. So, and then we go. We've provided training in, up in Skamania. We've provided training over in Portland. We support, other agencies. So our structure is we have commanders. There's a commander from the VPD side. There's a commander from the sheriff's office side. Medical program directors, obviously Dr. Whitwer. In our structure, we have just a TEMS training physician. If you remember Dave Lloyd filled that position for many years. We have a TEMS team leader, an active member of the TEMS team. Underneath that, they have a continuing education coordinator, which is a civilian, typically, not a non-operational person. And then they set up training, provide training for us. Tactical liaison officer is a new position for us that we're working to fill. We'd really like it to be a fire department captain or above, and that position would work directly with the team leader and the assistant team leader in coordinating EMS response. So assistant team leader, and then we have TEMS medics, Tier 1 and Tier 2. A Tier 1 medic is a SWAT medic. Has to pass the SWAT PT test, has to train every day with the SWAT team, and so that medic is capable of any operation embedded within the team itself. So a Tier 2 medic is a medical specialist. We have our own PT test. It's not to the SWAT standard, but it's a PT test, and then typical duties for them, they provide medical coverage on armor, or as a quick reaction force. This isn't, this medic isn't the kind of guy that's going to strap on his NVG and go hunt down bad guys with SWAT in the middle of the woods somewhere. So what we've done, this is pretty much over the last year. In 2016, 24 SWAT training days, including tactical training and live fire training. And as I said, each one of those we treat as a mission. We may participate in the training, we may be on the line shooting and qualifying with our weapons, but that is a mission for us. Most injuries on SWAT teams come during training. 34 missions and call-outs with SWAT. We also supported our mobile response teams, riots in Portland, quick response force for Vancouver's mobile field force, direct medical support, East Metro SWAT, ATF Clackamas, Metro EDU, and then what also we call our patrol first response. So even when we're driving around in our patrol cars and we're listening to what's going on with fire and EMS, if we're close to a call and know that we can help out, we will come and help out. We've had several times where we've arrived and done CPR or deployed an AED pretty successfully. Our training, National Tactical Officers Association TEMS course. Everyone on the team is a Criminal Justice Training Center instructor. Every one of us are AHA CPR instructors. We're all EMS evaluators so that we can provide our own training. Everyone's at least an IV tech or better. We've trained PHTLS. We do a SWAT certification week every year, which is a 5-day training block. Typically we travel someplace, whether it's over a YTC, out to Camp Rylea, but we call it a certification week because it's that week that we use for qualifications. Any type of expirable certification we try to renew during that time because we can dedicate the training resources. Obviously we participate in PCEP, and then just like PCEP has skills days every other month, we use those as a TEMS training day, and that's a dedicated TEMS training day. What we like to try to do is take that PCEP topic that we're working on that month and work it into how it applies to us. So it was a few months ago we did spinal immobilization. So once we did our regular PCEP skills, you know, we get out our SCEDs, our talon litters, our soft litters, and practice different carries and stuff like that. So we start to apply the tactical end to it. So what we provide to our guys, ongoing self-aid, buddy aid. Like I said, they've all got little blowout kits. They all know how to use them. We also provide the basic TCCC skills for patrol officers. Just about every patrol officer in Southwest Washington, well, I know every one of them has a tourniquet, and I'm pretty sure everyone has a trauma dressing, combat gauze. Many of them have hyphen chest shields. Are we out with those now? So, and they've been trained in how to use a tourniquet, how to pack a wound, and now sealing chest wounds. So, and then we provide active threat response training, CPR first aid training. So, and as I said, the biggest thing that we do the most visible thing for you guys that we do is our mission planning. Once we're advised that there's a mission coming up, they start planning the mission. The tactical guys start planning the mission and building that plan. We then look at the mission, where it's located, what resources we have. We create basically a medical threat assessment, and then we create an operational plan after that. We provide that operational plan to the Incident Command and SWAT Command. It becomes part of our briefing. And what we have found is if we don't have that plan, it quickly and something bad happens, it quickly falls apart. But if we have a plan, we know it, we practice it, and everybody on the team knows it and knows what's going to happen if something bad happens, then it seems to work out. So this is a sample plan. So based on the target that we're going to hit, we will basically build something like this. If we have preset casualty collection points, they'll be named and then mapped so that if they take a casualty, they know either where we're going with it or where they need to go with their casualty to get care. So in this one, you see that we have immediate action drills, rescue, evacuate. G3 is a piece of armor. So we had a dedicated piece of armor that day to evacuate casualties, and then the G3 would transport to AMR, which is located at the casualty collection point, 119th Ave and 33rd Street. Standby information, our trauma center information, environmental conditions. You know, in the wintertime, environmental conditions aren't really that big of a deal, but when you start looking at environmental conditions, say if we were in the middle of summer and it's 80 degrees with, you know, 90% humidity, and then they're also wearing their vests, their helmets, and everything else. So what we look at is you know, how long can they work in that environment? There's a chart that OSHA puts out as far as heat index, and when you look at it, it says if they're wearing a heavy vest or armor that you have to add between 5 and 10 degrees to the heat index. And so how much water do they need? So prior medical calls, we always take a look at the target, and depending on the area, we might look at the surrounding homes to see if there's been any medical calls. And then if we need life flight, we typically don't use it in the urban area. We're just too close, and the resources are there. But you know, if we start doing operations out in Trout Lake, or you know, way up in Aerial Cougar area, we may have pre-planned, pre-staged LZs, and if we do this, life flight's also given the operations plan, so they know where they're going, and it's that way it literally just takes a phone call. Hey, this is John with SWAT. Go ahead and activate life flight on our plan. So then what we try to add is information that EMS responders would need. You know, we've tried to listen to what a typical size up is and provide that kind of information, so that the more information you know going into it, you know what's going on. So serving a high-risk warrant, does possess firearms, location, single-story wood frame structure, 3 bedrooms, attached garage, service type, limited penetration. I'm not going to really go deep into that today, but you know, a lot of people still have the belief that, hey, SWAT team's coming. You know, they knock on the door, they kick it open, and you know, SWAT guys just fill the house. So that really doesn't happen very much anymore. We use a lot better tactics, a lot better technology to get to where we want to be. So oftentimes it's a surround and call out. Limited penetration, where we're just going to go own a little bit of piece of property inside the structure and call everybody else out to us. It might be a breach and hold. So very seldom would you see what's called a dynamic flow. Says whether or not flashbangs are going to be used. Should they barricade themselves? Gas, service time, casualty collection point, G3, and then who to contact. And then typically we function on Ops 59, and the reason for that is tactically we're on a channel which on our radios is A9, which makes it very simple to switch one button over and we're on Ops 59. So if you get sent to a standby and you wonder why it's always Ops 59, that's why. And then we create a map. You know, shows that, you know, this is the hot zone, so clearly our target is within that area. Warm zone, to, you know, just so that you know where we're going to be operating. And then as it showed that, you know, that this would be the route that the G3 would take to evacuate a patient here to the casualty collection point where we would meet, and then this is it shows the fastest egress out of the area. So we typically provide a map like that on where the casualty collection point is, where the command post is, and where the resources are. What we're working on is the link to get this information to the individual crew that's going to be on that standby. The trouble that we have is this might be in Engine 5's area, and so we provide the information to Engine 5 that night, but at 5 o'clock in the morning, you know, you get a respiratory call. The standby goes down at 5:30, and so they send Engine 6, and they don't have the info. So that's one of the things that we're hoping, the position with the tactical liaison officer, that there would literally be somebody with plan in hand to either brief or talk to the crew when they get there. This is what's going on, and this is the plan. So. You know, they usually monitor it, because typically at that time of the morning there not very much is going on. Whenever I have called them, they've always been there. We've never specifically asked for it to be monitored, but they typically do.
So they'll be aware where the CCP is?
Yep. Well, they may not know. One of the things we do is we'll create a CAD call. At least when I do it, and most of the other medics do, we'll create a CAD call for a police other search warrant. The address on the CAD call will be the CCP, or will be the command post. Somewhere in the notes, it will have the actual address of the target. That way we're not broadcasting the actual address of the target. And then we try to put in as much information as we can, where the CCP will be and everything else. So yeah, so if you get it up on your screen, most likely that address is going to be the command post. So very seldom do we try to use the actual target address on our CAD call. What we were really hoping for is at some point in time, we'd be able to take a PDF of like this, just like on a pre-fire plan. If we had a pre-plan call, be able to upload something like that, and you could just click on it like a PDF and open it up. So we're still working on that. So biggest thing is we don't replace EMS. We're just one little piece. You know, we're that piece between point of wounding care and traditional EMS where you guys would take over. We provide a direct service to law enforcement. If anybody asks, we come. We try to pre-plan the worst case scenario, and you know, 99 times out of 100, it's just a plan, and it never gets implemented. Again, like I said, it's a huge psychological support for the competing missions. You know, our guys are pretty well set knowing that we've got a good EMS system and a good plan behind us. Again, the health and welfare, we also get calls all the time. Hey, you know, my kid's pulling at his ear and crying a lot. You say, yeah, well, he's got an ear infection. Go take him to the doctor. And then we provide a source for medical subject matter experts to our command staff, to our incident commanders. So, fate of the wounded lies in the hands of the one who applies the first dressing. What we've learned is anybody can provide that dressing. You know, doesn't necessarily need to be a medic or an EMT. So we're hoping that anybody could provide it. So any questions on that? Went through it real quick. So why don't you take about a 5 or 10 minute break and come back and we'll go through some less lethal real quick. A little greater awareness of when we respond to calls, or when you ask us to come to calls for some help, why we may be limited in what we will do, and it's because it's limited on what we can do. So difference in law. So criminal law. Criminal law is written by the legislature, and it's lined out right in RCW. It is what we enforce. So, for example, theft 3. 9A56050. You look that up on, and it literally says, if you do these things, you've committed theft. You know, it could be shoplifting. It's a misdemeanor crime, and we arrest you or we write you a ticket for that misdemeanor crime. The difference is case law is how we apply that. Is what we do to do our jobs and how we enforce the law. So, for an example, I can arrest you for theft 3 based on the criminal law, but if I want to interview you after you're in custody, I have to read you your rights. That's Miranda. I'm sure everybody remember see it on TV all the time. You got to read them Miranda rights. That's case law. So if I arrest you, I can search your person, but absent a warrant, I probably can't search your car or some other conditions. That's a case called Gantt. And so these cases come down. Basically somebody does something happens, they're arrested, they go to jail, and during that process they say, hey, what they did wasn't right, and this is why. And so they argue it to a court, and the court looks at it, and it's typically on civil rights or constitutionality, and the court will make a ruling. And the instant that court makes the ruling, that's it. Everything we do after that could change. It doesn't change retrospectively, but it does change that moment. So there's case law being made all the time, and most of it is just minor stuff. But every now and then there's what's called a landmark case, which creates a bright line rule. And it basically says you shall not, or you shall do something. Failure to do that, or doing it after that, is a significant civil rights violation, unconstitutionality, and I literally could be held responsible for that. So who makes these laws? Washington State Supreme Court, obviously. Third Circuit Court, which is a federal court out of San Francisco. The U.S. Supreme Court, also, once they make those cases, that becomes case law. Other circuit courts, again, we're in the Third Circuit. I think there's 10 circuits. While they make cases in their circuit, they are non-binding to us, but we really need to pay attention. Because if a judge in Georgia said, hey, don't do this, and we continue to do this, it could very easily go straight up to the courts. The courts will look at what the other courts have done and says, yeah, you shouldn't be doing that. So while it's what that's called non-binding, but we still try to pay attention to what the other courts are doing. So let's talk about use of force for a little bit. Tennessee v. Garner was the biggest bright line case that there was for a while. It allowed police officers to use any means necessary to effect the arrest. That's where the police stop or I'll shoot you came from. And you know what? They did. So up until that point in time, if you ran away from the police, they shot you because they had to arrest you. So Garner was a 15-year-old boy fleeing from a residential burglary. So he broke into somebody's house. He's running away from the police. Police tell him to stop. He's unarmed. They knew he was unarmed. He had nothing in his hand. They said so. Tried to climb a fence to escape, so the police shot him. Shot him and killed him, okay? So up until that point in time, that was the law. That's what the law allowed you to do. That police officer did nothing wrong because it had never been challenged before. So U.S. Supreme Court looked at that and said, you know what, based on the Fourth Amendment Constitution to be free from unreasonable search and seizure, so what they decided is that police shooting a person to stop them is a seizure. That's the ultimate seizure. If I have to shoot you to stop you, I'm placing a seizure on you. And they said, you know what, based on these circumstances, that's unreasonable. So that was the first time that any of the courts had really weighed in on use of force, and in this case, deadly use of force. So it became known as the fleeing dangerous felon rule, that you have to be really kind of a bank robber with a gun before we can shoot somebody that's fleeing from us. Otherwise, we can't shoot shoplifters when they run from Walmart. So this became a bright line rule. And when you think of it, this is only 32 years old. So, in 1984, if you still ran from the police, they shot you. So, next one came in 1989, Tennessee, or Graham v. Connor was the next one. So, I believe Graham was a diabetic, okay? And what police saw was was suspicious activity. Car with two guys in it pull up to a Minute Mart, which we conveniently call the stop and rob. So passenger gets out, runs into the Minute Mart, and comes out just a few seconds later, jumps in the car, and they take off at high speed. Police said, that looks suspicious. And so they stopped the car, saying, oh, man, maybe they just robbed this place. So they stopped the car. Graham, who, again, is a diabetic, is a little belligerent. And because he's a diabetic. Well, force was used to detain him, and he got hurt. Ultimately, they found out that no crime had been committed. He ran into the store because he was going to get a candy bar. He didn't have any money, so he ran back out and told his buddy, hey, take me to so-and-so's house, because I'm sure that they've got, pop, orange juice, or something else that I need. So ultimately, no crime had been committed, but yet force had been used. So what the courts did is they looked at that and said, you know what, we're going to define this a little bit more. So the reasonableness of the use of force is going to be based on the severity of the crime, the degree of danger to the police or others, and then the amount of resistance or effort to flee capture. So in other words, if you've got the shoplifter running from Walmart and I say stop, and he stops and puts his hands up, the amount of force that I can use to detain him is going to be significantly different from the shoplifter that comes out, boots the security guard, now it becomes a robbery, pulls out a knife, waves it at the officers as they're coming. So you could see how quickly a little crime becomes really a big crime, and so the amount of force that can be used is different. A fleeing bank robber that still has his gun, a kidnapper. So, as opposed to a guy just in a stolen car running from us. So, very different levels of use of force. So, and the big one that they look at, what is the severity of the crime? So, Glenn v. Washington County. This was basically the shoe that dropped. This is Washington County over in Hillsborough. Okay. Police contact 18-year-old Glenn in front of his home. He had a pocket knife. He was holding it to his neck and threatening to commit suicide. His parents had called, worried for his safety. He's intoxicated. And like I said, he's holding it to his throat. Police show up. They say, drop the knife. He doesn't. Less lethal shotgun is used. He turns to run back into the house. Police shoot and kill him. Okay? So this whole thing happened in about 8 seconds. Courts ruled after that not only must law enforcement consider the Graham factors, but now they must consider the governmental interest in protecting the individual from themselves. That was key, because up until that point in time, we would literally shoot people to stop them from shooting themselves, to protect them from themselves, or use a high degree of force, again, to protect them from themselves. So, and what this has come down to is, so we now consider this all the time. What is the government's interest? What is the state's interest in doing what I need to do based on the severity or the intrusion into your privacy? Oh.
How many rounds were fired at this guy, too?
8, I think. 8 or 10. Yeah. You know. Had a kid that didn't commit a crime. So his only thing was he was actually running from the police to get away from being shot with a less lethal shotgun again. So we also have to consider the subject's mental health, and then does law enforcement know or should have known the individual had a special condition which leads to greater harm from the use of force. So, you know, if I look at somebody and they may look like they're in excited delirium, or clearly are altered on alcohol or some other type of drug, you know, how much force am I going to use to either detain him or not? And so I have to start considering that. The courts are clearly considering that when they look at if what I did was reasonable. So what happened with Glenn v. Washington County is later in civil court, this is what always gets us. It's not the criminal, because realistically those cops didn't do anything criminally wrong. Up until that moment, they did everything that was within their policy, within law, and everything else. So, but civilly, what they looked at is that they'd used unreasonable amount of force to stop Glenn. One, he hadn't committed a crime. He wasn't a danger to the officers, even though they tried to argue that perhaps he would be a danger to the family had he been allowed to go back into the house with his knife, but that was unsuccessful. And his only flight was to run from the less lethal force. So there's all 3 Graham factors, and none of them meet it. So no crime, he's simply running to get away, and he really wasn't a danger to anybody but himself. So you come up with a big fat 0 on that one. $2.5 million awarded to the family from the sheriff and the 2 deputies. I can't afford that. I listened to this. So, and so that's one of the most significant rulings that shifted our paradigm. Not only because it's clearly in our circuit, but it's right across the bridge. So it was very close to home. So other cases, again, like I said, these have happened in other circuits, but we look at them to see what's kind of going on and say, oh yeah, we probably shouldn't do that either. 10th Circuit Court, 2015, police are called to a hospital to assist with a subject out of control. How many people have heard that on the radio? You know, it does happen. Hey, come to the hospital. We got this guy just out of control. Police contact him. Taser's used. It's ineffective. Force is used. Staff sedate him. He dies. So, ruled police knew, or you know, what they hung their hat on is police knew or should have known the individual had a special condition. Well, he was in the hospital because he had excited delirium. So, ruled wrongful death by the police. 4th Circuit Court in 2016, bipolar schizophrenic, and he's off his meds. He's actually taken to the hospital where he escapes the hospital. So police are called. He's found clinging to a post, refusing to do what he's told and stuff like that. Danger only to himself. In fact, the physician even wrote on the paperwork, he's a danger only to himself, nobody else. So he's contacted by police. Again, taser is used. It's ineffective. Force is used, and later he dies. Again, no crimes committed, so wrongful death by police. The one thing I do want to point out is even though taser is used in both of these, in the end, it wasn't the taser. It had nothing to do with the taser. That, what it later had to do with was the force that was applied after that, the physical force. Because in both of these, they were ineffective because they were in such a condition that taser requires a certain number of electrons to work within your muscle to get a good what's called electromuscular dissociation, and these guys just weren't firing axons correctly, so taser's ineffective. So those were the cases. That's kind of what's led us to today. And so, every time we go out there and think about this, it's like, well, has he committed a crime? Is he a danger to me? Is he a danger to you guys? And so one of the things that I didn't put in here is one of the things the courts look at is they don't allow us to put ourselves in danger. So if I create the situation which leads to the level of force, that can be deemed unreasonable because they'll say, one, what was the state's interest, and should you have put yourself there? Now, if it's a hostage rescue, yeah, I should probably insert myself and I should probably do something about it. But if it's simply a guy that's barricaded in his house with a gun and says, I want to kill myself, I might say, yeah, I'm going to leave that one alone. Because I go busting through that door and I create a confrontation where he's armed, I'm armed, and something bad happens, they're going to say, what were you doing? What's the state's interest in that? So, community caretaking, Fourth Amendment. Community caretaking, you hear it every now and then. It's like, police have this community caretaking function. And it was first coined by the U.S. Supreme Court as an exception to the warrant requirement. There was about 5 or 6 at that point in time on what we could do without a warrant. And one of them, they said, well, community caretaking. If somebody is fallen in their home and they can't get up and they've pushed their life alert button and the door's locked, well, certainly I can kick the door in to go save them. That's a community caretaking function. I don't need a warrant to enter their home. So, but as time has gone by, what the courts have said is what you can't do is you can't separate your law enforcement function from your community caretaking. It does, yes, you can break the door down, but you're still a cop. Everything you do is still a cop. You still have to follow the laws and all of the rules that go along with that. So the totality of that situation should amount to probable cause should I want a warrant. I can't just go in, kicking down doors. Well, I think I heard somebody scream for help. So, good case recently. We had one. An employer called up police and said, hey, my employee didn't show up to work today. He shows up to work every day, and he didn't show up to work today. Maybe somebody should go to his house and check on him. And so we go to his house, knock on the door. There's no answer. But then we start to look around. His work van is sitting in the driveway, literally with the driver's door open. His coffee cup is still sitting on the console. It's cold now. His lunch is there and so clearly he was getting ready to go to work. So where is he? So you put all of that together, his work truck's there, didn't show up to work, coffee cup like he's ready to go, made a lunch, getting ready to go to work. So you put that all in a totality, and if it were a crime, yeah, I've probably got enough for a search warrant to search his house. So they did. They booted his door, and he had died that day. He had gone back into the house to get something, and had the big one, and died. So, community caretaking, yeah. But you see how we have to add up the totality. I've gone to many houses where it'd say, hey, we need you to go check on somebody. No answer. I got nothing else. There's no car in the driveway. You know, they didn't answer their phone. You're allowed a certain amount of privacy. In fact, the Constitution expects it, and the courts want us to allow you that privacy. And so that's why they say, what's the governmental interest in me then intruding into your house just to find out what you're doing because somebody's worried about you? So the courts have started to, the kind of in a muddle. It's still out there. We do this, but it's starting to really be looked at. So the Washington State Involuntary Treatment Act. This is the current law. Took it right off the website. So what is it that we do so that we can involuntarily take somebody to the hospital? This is the first part of the law. So number one, when a designated mental health professional receives information that a person, as a result of a mental disorder, and this is key, presents an imminent, this is the other key, imminent, there is a definition for imminent, and it is right now. Not, it might happen tomorrow, maybe even this afternoon. It's right now. Like, if I don't do something, something bad's going to happen. So, serious harm, imminent danger because of being gravely disabled, after investigation, allege of the facts, reliability, credible person, designated mental health may take such person or cause by oral written order such a person to be taken into emergency custody and evaluation of treatment, okay, for not more than 72 hours. So this is the 72-hour hold based on CDMHP, the mental health professional, saying, this guy needs some help. And typically, Aaron, do you go to a judge or a magistrate to get the pickup order?
We have the ability to write ourselves.
Yeah. So they write a pickup order, and then you guys are called, or we're called, and says, it's time for this guy to go to the hospital, whether he wants to or not. So one of two things is going to happen. They're going to get up and voluntarily, okay, you got to go to the hospital, and they're going to go. But if they say, nope, I'm not going to go, I don't want to go, what do you do? So typically we get called. If this was going to, I would much rather this happen, because one, it kind of takes the onus off of me. I'm not making a decision. I'm not deciding, hey, because of this threat, he really needs to go to the hospital. A mental health professional has already done that and written that paperwork out, and he'd made that decision. So what I'm told by my civil attorney guys, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, is that this rises, when you look at those Graham factors on crime committed and everything else, that this rises somewhere maybe around like a misdemeanor warrant. Yeah, I'm not going to go to town and pull out the billy club and start whooping this guy to make him go to the hospital. But I can put hands on him, put him in cuffs, detain him, and, pick him up out of his chair to make this happen.
So, John, quick question. Aaron, when you guys, you always take law enforcement with you when you enter a keyword. You guys always take, if you're going to do an ITA on somebody, you always take law enforcement with you, or is there ever a situation where you may do that on your own, or do you even show up at all?
Yeah, we don't always take law enforcement. There are instances where we may issue an order of apprehension without it actually seeing the individual, but we try to limit that as much as possible. We have to have cause that we can prove to a judge for their immediate danger. So that's only for dispatch on other cases from the hours before we get somebody. Is it worth me talking about our process right now?
Yeah, go ahead, because I mean, this, to me, this is probably the most important part of the process, because honestly, what we would rather see on the law enforcement side is it deferred to crisis or mental health. Then if they need our help, we're far better to work than for us to work independently and say, yeah, he needs to go to the hospital. So go ahead. Here, actually, you.
Use the podium mic if you could. Sorry, 'cause this is the end.
Yeah, it's being.
Okay.
Is there a handheld mic in there?
you want to walk around.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Okay. All right, hear me okay? Yeah. Okay, so as Mark said, I'm a designated mental health professional that is a county designation that is established under 7105. Our role in the community is to provide intervention for crisis situations and then proceed with the court process that for an individual who is detained. So a little bit about the structure of the crisis system in our community. We have been restructuring for about 1.5 years now. We contracted with a place called Protocol Services, which is a crisis line that answers all over the country. Has anybody called the crisis line about somebody that they've been concerned about? Negative, okay. Usually by the time you guys are involved, somebody's going to the hospital. But the initial point of contact oftentimes for us is somebody or someone's family calling with psychiatric concerns to the crisis line. 95% of the calls that come through on that, the crisis line is able to handle without involving law enforcement or EMTs. The other times, they will be first contacting a DMHP to discuss a potential outreach. So we go out in the community, we have to go in groups of 2. If it's a situation where there is risks identified for our safety, then we would be taking law enforcement with us. But if it's somebody that we know well with no history of violence, then we'd be going out on our own initially. We are always operating under an attempt to develop a less restrictive alternative for treatment. So if somebody is heading towards being a danger to themselves and others, but they're not quite there yet, we're going to try to identify resources that are available. If they have a previous psychiatric treatment provider, we'll try to reconnect them with that. If we can get them to a crisis stabilization unit, we have 3 beds available in this community normally. Right now that's out of commission, but that is a resource that we use frequently. Or we're going to talk about voluntary psychiatric hospitalization. At that point, we may be calling for EMTs to come transport an individual. That would not be on a pickup order. That would just be them going as if anybody else was going to the hospital volitionally. If an individual is unable to agree to that, and we've identified that there is that immediate risk to self, others, or because somebody is gravely disabled, which means that they are unable to take care of their basic needs because of a psychiatric concern, or because they've shown significant deterioration in their previous level of functioning. Those are the 2 criteria that we can hold somebody on for grave disability. Then we will issue that order of apprehension and have the individual taken to the emergency department where they'll be medically cleared. And once they're medically cleared, we go in and read rights similar to Miranda rights, so that we can gather information to present to a judge. And that, once we've made that determination, whether they will be placed on a 72-hour hold, we start looking for an evaluation and treatment facility. We have one in our community that we're able to use, telecare over on the VA campus. I suspect some of you have been over there before. And at the end of that 72-hour hold, then there will be a court hearing at the facility, and they will determine whether to extend that up to another 14 days. And then that 14 days can be extended up to 90 days, and 90 can be extended up to 180 if needed. So we're always, there's been a shift in our community, and this was primarily the court process is what DMHPs have been working on in the past, and we're trying to be intervening at lower levels now. So we're trying to respond more in the community to calls that we previously may not have gone out on because it didn't seem to reach the acuity threshold for us. We're trying to balance that with staffing limitations. It's a pretty intensive process for us to complete a full psychiatric evaluation, and there's a lot of documentation. We're with the county, so that goes alongside that. So we are trying to increase our outreaches to meet with individuals, and at the same time, we aren't able to always meet as requested. We have staff of about 20. We staff 24/7. Most of the time after hours, we're stuck in hospitals or in jail. We see a lot of individuals in jail and do most of our involuntary treatment act evaluations in the hospitals. So yeah, the priority of life is something that comes up in interesting ways for us a lot of times as we're talking about issuing these orders of apprehension. I remember a situation where I was at a facility at our crisis stabilization unit, and there was a woman there who had a history of assaulting people. We can base their danger to others on any history within the last 10 years. If we see somebody going towards that deterioration that would likely lead to them assaulting people again, then we can pursue psychiatric detention. And this woman, I had called for officers to come and bring her to the hospital. AMR showed up, officers showed up. She was not going to have any part of it. She grabbed a banana and started running around the facility, pointing it at people and saying she was going to kill them with it. So officers didn't want to lay hands on because of the risks. I mean, you know, it's somebody running around with a banana acting crazy. That's like not something we really want to get involved in, understandably, because of the risk of potentially harming this individual. So eventually, you know, it was just folly of errors with their staff chasing this individual down the street and surrounding her, and eventually a nurse was able to work with EMTs to get her onto the gurney, and we did get her to the hospital. But you know, it is kind of a delicate process to figure out when we want to have somebody forced against their will in, because there are definitely risks, and it can be an extremely traumatic process for somebody. You know, the majority of folks that we work with have a trauma history anyway, and that can be very re-traumatizing to have that forced upon you. That is what we do in a nutshell. Do you guys have any questions for me? Yeah.
Do you mind, so 7105 talks about the result of a mental disorder, which is obviously a broad spectrum, but then it specifically says being gravely disabled. Can you define what gravely disabled means in terms of what threshold needs to be met for us to have law enforcement physically detain individuals?
Absolutely, that's a good question. Grave disability is danger to because of a severe mental illness. Oftentimes we're seeing that in people who are so psychotic that they're not eating or drinking for days. They're walking out into traffic because they're so preoccupied with what's going on in their head. They just have no awareness of reality. This can be, you know, people who are paranoid and believe that there are unseen others that they need to defend themselves from. We've had, you know, folks shooting firearms in residential settings, trying to kill hallucinations. So it's pretty broad. There's not really a super clear definition, but it is, you know, anything. We're always happy to take a look if you guys come across something where you're concerned that this person is heading downhill. Chances are we've probably already had contact with them, and we can base historic detentions on to hold somebody now. So we are able to the idea is to try to curb that before it gets worse, and recovery is going to be more difficult. And yes, for a mental disorder, it gets tricky when people are using substances. So oftentimes we're going to issue an order of apprehension, have somebody sent to the hospital, have them detox off of any substances that they are on. You know, we get a lot of people who are, you know, anybody at a 0.3 BAL is going to be suicidal most of the time. You know, we want people to kind of, you know, sleep that off first, and then once we come in and see them, we wait till they're under a 0.08, and then we're able to provide an assessment to see if there's a psychiatric concern present that would need longer-term treatment than just detox protocols at the hospital. Yeah.
Run into a couple situations recently with that borderline minor. Can you speak to age cutoffs and what can specifically be detained that
Yeah.
spectrum and how we deal with those types of situations.
Good question. RCW 7134 is the rule, the law detailing treatment, involuntary treatment for minors. Up until a few years ago, we were doing all of the involuntary treatment for minors, but they passed a law allowing for parental initiated treatment, meaning that if any parent calls 911, then they should be able to have their minor transported to the hospital and evaluated by a mental health professional and forced into treatment if that is deemed appropriate. So we used to have a lot more contact with minors than we do now because of that, but it is still something where if they determine that there's no parent or guardian willing to seek that level of care and it's needed, then they would call a DMHP in to place them on a hold. And that's 13 to 18. So under 12 is only parent initiated.
I was, one of the law enforcement agencies recently told me they couldn't put anybody on a hold that was younger than 16. So I was just curious if that was a defined number or was that a...
No, that's not, 16 isn't one that we work with. I don't remember. We have done order of apprehensions for people, for minors. It's been quite a while since we have. And so I'm not sure what the 16
Yeah, and I had heard that number.
timeline is
I was
coming
looking
from.
for clarification.
Are you familiar with that one?
You said that law enforcement said that they,
Yeah, they couldn't put somebody on the hold that was younger than 16 without parental.
Are you familiar with that, Kathy? No.
It's just an error.
Yeah.
that's an error.
Okay,
And-
that's perfect. That's what I needed to know.
Well, believe me, we try to train on this as much as you guys do, because it evolves all the time
Sure.
and everything, and you know, depending on where that officer came from in a jurisdiction, if he's new, but yeah, there's plenty of misunderstanding on our side.
Oh, okay.
As there is.
Yeah, because I had that number thrown out before and I wasn't quite aware where that was. I had to take the word for it at that point in time.
Yeah, and until I started doing the research on this, I didn't learn about the new law for minors until I hadn't seen that yet.
What other law that recently changed that has been affecting the work that we do is called Joel's Law, and that allows for families to petition the court directly if they've if a DMHP has seen an individual and determined that they don't meet detention criteria. This came from some case law up in Seattle where an individual was seen by a DMHP, released, and a couple of weeks later he went out, purchased firearms, pointed it at police, and was shot and killed. So the family worked really hard to get this law passed so that they can petition the judge directly, whereas we are normally the acting for the court in making that determination. So that's something that has kind of, we're still working out how exactly that's going to look with our court process, but it is something where we're starting to get some requests post-evaluation for families wanting to see an individual detained where we don't see the criteria for that. So far, they haven't overruled any of our decisions, but in other counties that has happened. Yes?
You said that DMHP contracts with Crisis Line, so if we call Crisis Line, will they have, as you said, oftentimes you might already have a history with the individual. Would the Crisis Line have that information on hand, especially a history of either suicidal or homicidal ideation?
The crisis line has history of anything that's come through the crisis line only. Our local records they don't have access to, but you can always request to speak with the DMHP and then they'll contact us and we'll get back to you as soon as possible with any history that we might have. So yeah, I mean, you can both, there's records there that we would always review before we go out on cases. And they try to, if they have somebody that they're concerned about, then they'll contact us. Unfortunately, it's not quite as seamless as we would like it to be, since they are a separate company.
And is that a 24/7?
Yes.
Or-
Yep.
The crisis line is almost like poison control. It's this entity out there that takes the calls, triages it, listens to it, tries to resolve it, and then it either comes back through our system, or then they'll refer it to the CDMHP.
Yeah. One thing to keep in mind, if you do contact the crisis line, they're based in Portland, New Mexico, and then Michigan. So might not necessarily be speaking with somebody who's familiar with our terminology in our community. If you're getting frustrated with someone, you can always request a DMHP, and that will be somebody on the ground who's more familiar with what we have available. But for the most part, they do a really good job. They have standardized procedures, that they know all of our resources that we provide to people, and they do good work.
Aaron, as a rule, let's say that they decide that they need you, request a DMHP through the crisis line. You said they'll get back as soon as possible. For us, that, I mean, we can't have an EMS crew sitting, waiting at a house for an hour.
Yeah.
What's your timeline usually?
Our contract is response within 2 hours. You know, if we're at times we get down to one staff, and they might be on other cases. So it's rare, but there are times that we aren't even able to make that, and it's usually just the middle of the night. So in those cases, that might be one of those cases where we'd be issuing that order of apprehension, having the individual, you know, if you guys have enough cause to be that worried about them, we might just be having them brought to the hospital for us to evaluate as soon as we can.
So how will they affect that?
Calling through the crisis line and requesting to speak with the DMHP, we're able to usually, you know, we'll set aside whatever case we're working on and consult with you, and we may, you know, based on the imminence of the situation, just go ahead and issue that. And
Because a typical, at least in the past, it isn't happening as much now because of the crisis line intervention. We have a significantly decreased number of calls that EMS are primarily responding to.
Yeah.
But typical thing is they get there because there's a concern about suicidal ideation, or somebody may quote unquote have taken, you know, an overdose. So we get dispatched or get there. Law enforcement may or may not arrive, or they may or may not decide that, well, we're not going to engage, and then
And then leaves EMS out there.
our guys will talk to, they'll call medical control. The doctor says, the doc on medical control says, you got to bring him in.
yeah,
The person doesn't want to come in. And we're then at the point where law enforcement is not willing to say, okay, you either go with these nice paramedics or you come with me.
yeah.
Not willing to engage.
Yeah, we
And
can't do
so,
it anymore.
yeah, they can engage. Well, can't, or, you know, what, you know. No
Look,
matter-
Eric, I think we're having that problem,
Yep.
and that's why we meet once the Thursday
Right.
that's coming up every month, because
Right.
protocol, when those 911 calls come in, we try and solve
Right.
95%, but they're the ones that are gonna go through dispatch, and we're between a rock and a hard place because of that Glenn versus Washington.
Right.
We don't wanna leave you guys there. Protocol, they're suicidal, that's the most important thing to them, and unfortunately, law enforcement, like, we can't do that,
Right.
and we're trying to work through that, and as our meeting last month, we don't have that answer yet, because, and it's not that we're not willing
Oh, I know, but- no, I understand that, and
and we don't want any medic
But
hurt.
what are we gonna do in that
And
interim?
and I fully understand that we have two different missions.
Right.
But, you know, so my question to Aaron is, at the point that we would then ask to contact you, what can you do on your end?
Well, at that point, we would try to get a DMHP out to meet with the individual to determine if there's enough for us to, you know, contact a supervisor with law enforcement, or you know, just run it up the chain, because usually we reach some sort of plan. You know, sometimes it's tricky getting there, but we're always able to work something out to get the individual help.
Let's say you're in the middle of the night and you're short-staffed.
Yeah.
We need to contact you directly at that time. You set aside your, what you're doing at that moment, talk to our guys on the phone, and then what are you gonna do? You're gonna try to establish if they can give you enough information to put a hold on the person?
Correct. Yes. If we're not able to get out there and see the individual on our own, then we're going to try to establish that by phone. So you know, any information, historic or current that you guys can provide when you are with an individual that would indicate they're in immediate risk or have a history of getting there, diagnoses, access to lethal means of suicide or homicide. Those are all things that we're going to want to know when you do call us.
Is that really an option to sit on the scene, like you said, Dr. Ward, and try to contact them? I mean, it's, like you said, 2-hour response time. We can't.
No, but they can talk to you almost immediately on the phone.
And usually that's the outside of our response. So we're going to be triaging any cases that come in, the highest acuity cases, just like with you guys, we're going to be responding to. So if you guys have something that's really high acuity, we're going to try to drop everything else. If we,
It's high acuity, and the police are gonna be there to help us, and these are those gray areas
Yeah.
where they
Well-
don't need to get involved, they shouldn't get involved, but I have a patient who's refusing because they may or may not have taken something.
At some point in time,
You know what I mean?
you know,
But I think
you
that's
gotta
the
look
point
back
where we all
at
leave.
conscious,
I mean,
alert,
there's a point
oriented,
where you-
well-informed, making a decision, everything else, and well-documented, and I think the EMS has gotta start looking at the potential disengaging.
Right.
Disengage and call CDMHP to follow up. What happens after that is on that. That's what we've learned. What happens is we provide the resources, we provide the opportunity, we provide, you know, do you want to go to the hospital, do you want treatment for this? And if you don't, as long as you understand these things,
And we sign a representative.
and
We don't sit
you
on the
have,
scene.
one of the key quick, do you have a phone? Do you have access to a phone? Can
No.
you call crisis? Can you call 911? If you have the resources,
Well, as Rick brought up just a moment ago, I mean, the question is if, you know, is the person competent to refuse?
compass, correct.
And that's
yeah.
that's sometimes very difficult to establish.
And if you want to consult on those, so when you call the crisis line, I didn't talk about the staffing there. It's always master's level or above mental health professionals that you're going to be talking to. So if you have something where you're just not feeling real comfortable with leaving a scene because of a mental disorder, then you can always call and consult. Yeah.
So I don't know if I speak for all of us. I have to say, this is probably our most frustrating thing out there. And what I'm
Yeah.
hearing right here is, you guys have a plan and it's written in state law. You have a plan, it's written in state law. You say, state law, I have to walk away. And you say, we can't reach you, we can't get there. It seems to be like, she says, best case scenario, or the best example of cut and dry. I took something, but I don't want to go because I'm still alert oriented. It seems like, I want to go with my language, we're the toilet bowl. And that we catch everything, and that there's kind of like, well, I got a feeling, think this guy might hurt himself, like you said, an hour down the road, and it feels like we are all liable. You can walk away legally, you can walk away legally, and then we're sitting there kind of going, it's a
No, we
gray
can't.
area, it's kind of mushy.
Once we're in, we can't walk away. So we are going to follow
It's not
that
our-
process
it's
through.
matter of This guy's got a problem right now, and I need to talk to somebody right now, I don't even have time to battle this problem. Yeah, he's walking away from me, saying, he's not a threat to anybody but himself, and I'm like, yeah, well, I'm gonna be held liable.
Well, you guys still to some extent are.
Well, let me ask you, so Sue,
That's what I just.
That's exactly it, that's what I'm saying, it's this big.
you know what I'm
gray
saying,
area.
who's gonna hold you accountable?
That's what we're all fearful
Other
of.
than Dr. Whitworth?
We
And, you
don't
know, and
know.
as long as you're
Because,
following the
like-
protocol,
Right.
you walk away.
Yeah.
All these
But then it comes back.
These are all law enforcement based, though.
Not, but yeah, New Hampshire, Hoover, President Trump, and then it's, you know, it's like, that's
But
where I feel like, there's
EMS
not a black and white, like.
No,
Just
there's
like-
n-
Just like we've learned, EMS is not responsible for that person's actions.
Well, I'll tell you what, my personal, if you say we're not taking them, I walk off, you know, and it's all what the police officer does, and that's where I kind of get gray, because some police officers are very aggressive, and some aren't. You know, some are medically trained and have a little higher acuity, and I have more of a trust following what you say than some of the Vancouver new guys that are like, I don't know, I'm putting them on hold. There's no medical need. And so and I don't even argue. I'm just like,
And
you say
again,
go,
trust
we
me,
go.
there's a lot of work on our side that still needs to be done.
Right. No,
You know,
see, I'm not pointing any fingers here at anybody.
We're just
That's
one
what I'm
case
saying.
away from being in the law
I feel like
enforcement
this is
digest
really
ourselves.
vague. We're getting a lot of good answers, and kind of there's some of the problems we've had on it, but at the end of the day, it seems like a lot of times we're held out holding this mushy gray going, what do I do?
Yeah.
I've had this.
And that's when you ask. That's, you know, that it is a mushy gray. If this was
I got 2
easy,
weeks later at PCEP 3 months down the road, and now I'm liable for how I handled that patient 2 months ago.
Is there
Okay.
any case law, and you said there's lawsuits, is there case law that if a EMS, law enforcement is disengaged and EMS is disengaged, and somebody, you know, passes away or is harmed because they
Unfortunately, no, you know, there's
I
plenty of
don't
cases.
have that.
Yeah,
I've never
plenty of
heard
case
of
law
that,
that says
so.
that police are not held liable for either medical or what they, you know, but I don't, it hasn't really filtered down to EMS.
You said there's case law?
Yeah.
I don't know if it went to court, but we had one here where somebody forced somebody to the hospital against their will. And the big thing about refusals infected
Yeah, but
away.
that case never went to court.
Yeah, I don't, that's what I said, I don't know if
So
it went
you
to court, but
forced
it's
them or
still,
you-
it's
Yeah, we had-
something that, you know.
Somebody in the back who,
Did I hear you say that you could put them on a hold over the phone based on the information we give you and maybe fax it to the hospital?
yes,
Yes.
we can.
But law enforcement will not do anything.
Yes,
verbally.
it
We
has to
have it.
We have to have it in
At
writing.
least we have that.
They have to be in
The whole
writing.
Yeah,
review.
yeah, but we can fax it to the hospital. This happens fairly frequently, so.
But just like a warrant, we won't do a pickup without paper in hand.
Okay. So you have the ability to call it in, do it over the phone, fax to the hospital, law enforcement can help us get them to the hospital.
Law enforcement will unless it goes against that priority of life model that they have established.
Right,
I
so
wanna
just
be
to
mindful-
kind of, let's kind of synopsize this whole thing here, just a little bit. Because, you know, and I appreciate all the anecdotes because that's what you guys deal with on a daily basis. But what I am hearing is if you have a critical situation where it's not necessary or reasonable for law enforcement to be there, and you call crisis and say, I've got a critical, whatever word you want to use, high acuity situation that CDMHP triages, or DMHP triages, and will call you back, and they can, at that point, hold the patient for you, whereupon you take them in. The other issue that we haven't even talked about is medical control as well. And I understand you do have situations where medical control, and they're always going to say, let's bring them in. Well, if that's not practical, then sometimes you just have to walk away. I mean, if you go through the refusal protocol, it's pretty clear. You go step by step by step. You've attempted DMHP. You've gone through crisis. Law enforcement, yes or no. Medical control, you've gone through that whole process. You've talked to their preacher and tried to get them to come in. Whatever it takes, sometimes you got to leave them there. And that's kind of what it boils down to. You know, there isn't any absolute answer here, but what we have found out today is we have some, I mean, this is a new thing. I didn't know we could call DMHP, which I think is fantastic, if we have that situation.
We have a referral, we just refer it over to.
Yeah, exactly.
crisis.
And
It's actually in the orders to call DMHP,
No.
including the phone number.
yeah,
See, he thought he wrote medical control.
yeah, actually, that would assume I read the orders. So the next issue is that, like I mentioned at the beginning of the session, is that most of these cases don't even come to our attention anyways because they go, whereas in the old days, we'd go on everything. And nowadays, it goes from CRESA directly to crisis. It's a referral directly to crisis, which, from our standpoint, really helps the
Which
decision
unfortunately,
tree.
though, the ones that you will get involved with are the most difficult cases.
Correct.
The didn't meet crisis, may or may not meet law enforcement criteria, but something probably should be done. The key to this is what, go back to what the law says. Is it imminent? One, is it a mental health problem? Okay, and what our civil guys have said, that just because somebody wants to commit suicide does not necessarily mean they have a mental health problem. I mean, if they repossess my truck, my wife breaks up with me, and my dog dies, and I lose my job, and I say, that's it, I've had enough, I'm going over the edge.
Country western.
Yeah, country western song. So, that's not a mental health problem. That's somebody making a conscious decision. And so you have to kind of met that out. One, is it a mental health problem? And two, is it imminent? Is it so imminent that if you walk away or don't do something catastrophically bad's going to happen? And, I remember the old forms used to say danger to themselves, danger to property, danger to, none of that's not in the law. The law literally just says, presents an imminent likelihood of serious harm, or is in imminent danger because of grave ill. So, and the key is imminent. I took some pills. and yet you can't find any pill bottles in the entire house. Or I took some pills and you find out they took 3 Prozac. Great, call medical, or call poison control. What's 3 Prozac gonna do? Nothing. You wanna go to the hospital? No. You gotta decide, is this truly an imminent danger of the 3 Prozac that he took to get into, to a scrap with this guy? And then, are they aware? Do they know where they're at? Do they know what they did? Do they know the consequences? The key to the Dr. Wood is, are they competent to make that decision? If they aren't competent, maybe we are looking at a mental health issue. Yeah.
I know the risk is to anecdotes to death, but just for complete clarity, what I want all of our providers to understand is that if law enforcement is willing to put them on a hold, we can take them against their will. If medical patrol says bring them in, we can take them against their will. If DMHP says take them in, we can take them in. So if any of those 3 things, either of those 3 things are met, we can transfer.
Yes.
the patient
What's
against
changed
their will.
is the.
And if none of those 3, if failure of all 3 of those parts to do it, we can walk away with impunity.
I would just well document, all that entire process. Do they have access to crisis? Do they have a phone? Did they make a conscious decision? All the normal medical stuff. Yeah.
The gray area with me though is if like medical control says, yeah, take them in, and PD says no. And we have to do, a sprain. So that's, to me, that's where.
So, biggest thing is what's changed is we're not going to fight with them to make them go. That's the bottom line.
And you shouldn't have, the orders are very specific. They say do not put yourself at harm. So if you have to, if the police aren't willing to restrain the guy and he's so violent with you that you're gonna get hurt, walk away. Walk away.
Even if the physician says bring him in?
Even if tell the physician to go out and restrain him themselves. That's why you guys get to work differently than the police do, because the law enforcement, because theoretically you are less threatened to them. Now, one of the other options is put them on. If the person says, okay, will you talk to crisis yourself? Put them on the phone with crisis hotline. Let them talk with it. Let crisis work. They may know them already.
Yeah, because I'll be in the protocol. If crisis can't get in touch with them, it does come back to us. So crisis may never have been able to get a hold of them, but if you're standing there with them and say, why don't we call crisis? Talk with crisis and see if they can resolve your issue right now, and we're going to go away.
Okay, to synopsize again.
Thanks, Mark.
Okay, yeah, so the way this works is when the mental health issue comes up, originally the call goes directly to crisis. Okay, the referral is made to, to DMHP and or EMS depending on the threat, etc. You have resources, law enforcement, medical control, and just because medical control says something doesn't mean you have to do it. I mean, like Dr. Whitwer said.
Just
Just
document while you can't.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll make a phone call in
Being a little incorrect in that. Yes, you have to do it, but if you cannot,
Yeah.
that's different. I mean, that is it may be physically impossible for you to intervene.
Challenging me.
I mean, just like the courts are saying, we can't fight with these guys to make them go. I don't think there's any expectation that you guys are supposed to fight with them to make them go either.
When you call in and say, look, I've done 14 rounds of ACLS and I still have asystole, and the doc says, oh, you can't leave anybody dead at the scene. Keep doing ACLS. There's you don't have to. You say, okay, but.
Okay, yeah, so
All right.
let's bring this back around because there's about 95% of the audience that doesn't have a clue as to what's happening in this discussion right now. So, any other questions for Aaron? Jason?
Dun, dun, dun.
I'm sorry, I don't have the exact example that falls right through all those holes, and it's gonna happen a lot for all of us. There's a kid, 14 years old, I don't know if you were aware of this morning, and it was handled awesome today by your deputy. He's 14 years old, he's got autism, he's 6'4", weighs 100 pounds, but I guess he's got 400-pound man strength. Has broke his mom's jaw, dislocated his dad's arm. They come to us this morning going, he's doing it again, and we're scared. Their whole house is cleared, there's holes in every wall in this house from this. It's a very nice house, a very nice neighborhood, and this kid has just dominated their lives. They're at a loss, they don't know what to do. I guess he also has pandas, which they're starting to realize that's why these psych beds aren't working, because it's also both coming from both ends. The only thing that works on it is Geodon. It was gonna be a fight this morning. Thank God we all got outside, read the notes. You guys have a huge file on it. It's been a big confrontation. The thing of it is, in 5 minutes, you'll see every rainbow of spectrum of affect you could possibly see. I had him laughing at one point and wanting to kill me at the next. And you can see in his eyes, it's scary. He has his almonds. But it ended up being that he actually went and sat on the gurney, put his hands down, we were able to restrain him, got him in there. Everything went really well by the way everybody on scene handled it. We tried to keep you can't approach him aggressive or he'll just freak out. He's 14. Their hands are up in the air going, we don't know what to do. If it would have turned bad this morning, we would have had to wrestle him down, G on him, hopefully early on so he relaxes. I mean, that falls in all the loopholes. He's underage, they're saying do it, we're gonna have to wrestle him.
And that's a good example, because I can speak for myself and a large majority of the folks I work with. If you turn to them and said, we at least need to grab this guy long enough to sedate him. I mean, Drew, do you see? I mean,
that's exactly what we had, but I mean, there at one point
we're not. I mean, granted, I mean, we're not going to get out the billy sticks and we're not going to get out the taser and stuff like that. But I mean, and again, the other thing with the policy when I get to them, every situation is unique, and that's why we have to look at every situation given these factors and still take some action. And believe me, I've dealt with the people standing on the roof trying to talk him down, and I have the Versed in one hand and the Geodon in the other, and saying if he comes down in a fighting mood, we're going to fight long enough to make it work. So and that's again, I think chemical sedation in some of those situations is far better than the fight that it's going to cause. And I know that personally, I don't have a problem using just enough force that's reasonable to make that happen. That's what we're getting to.
In those complex cases, we meet monthly to try and know about those addresses, but no.
Yeah, and that's why we flag those addresses.
When you guys get that, you know yourself, and that's what we have to do on those. So when you guys have those cases, you call whomever.
Yeah.
So we can staff that, talk about it.
And I know who you're talking about.
And then
your officer is what saves that whole thing.
Yeah.
He met me outside after I was reading the notes going, this is going to be bad. He came out and he's like, get ready, and this is how we're going to handle it. And we just kind of went in with kid gloves and able to coax him in there. It took a good half hour, but we were able to do it. We got our strap down, didn't even have to use the on. But without that, if we would have probably handled it as normal, it would have gone really bad.
So are you guys on the student threat assessment team? Anybody?
Yeah.
At schools?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I was SRO, we did a lot of them. So.
Those are perfect for those sort of things.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Absolutely.
But yeah, that's
Absolutely.
again, every case is going to be unique, but this provides a framework on why we make the decisions we do, resources that are available that work better.
I'd say what you guys are saying is exactly what we're asking for. That's where I say things like the last couple of years, we've been stuck at catching it, even though nobody's helping us support it. And it's like we all feel liable. We leave them here late night, we're going to lose a shirt, a job, and this and that. It's like, what you're saying is when we think it shouldn't happen, everybody will start being on the same page.
So, all right. Anything else for Aaron?
Thanks, guys.
Cool.
Thanks, Aaron.
No, thank you, Aaron. So that's the first paragraph of the Washington State ITA. The second paragraph is the law enforcement side. Police officers may take or cause such person, and that's a huge word, may. There's two words in law that we always pay attention to, may and shall. Okay? If the law says you shall, then you shall. If the law says you may, it's a choice. So for many years, many years, in fact until Glenn v. Washington, there was this perception on law enforcement side that if I don't do something, I'm going to be held liable. If I don't drag this guy kicking and screaming from his house so that I make him get some type of medical care, I'm going to be held liable. Well, all that changed. Now the liability has shifted. You can't drag people kicking and screaming from their house. That's just, that's their choice. So you have greater liability by doing that as opposed to doing nothing. So, but again, it says, taken to custody, immediately delivered, crisis stabilization unit, pursuant to when reasonable cause to believe suffering from a mental disorder, and again, imminent likelihood of serious harm or imminent danger of being gravely disabled. Okay, this is the crazy person who's walking across I-5. Not the guy that's locked in his bedroom, breaking every toy that he has because he's angry that day, which I've been on that guy too. I'm sorry, So, but again, it's that imminent. It has got to be literally unfolding right there before my eyes. If I don't do something, it's going to happen, type of imminence. So, but yeah, the big key of this is again the may. So, again, the perceived liability was once if we failed to take action, but when the Supreme Court finally came down and said that the police have no duty to protect the general public, so, which kind of sounds odd, but if it's what we do, it's a service we provide.
Corporations are people.
Yeah, we provide this protection, but legally we don't have a duty. Because if I did have a duty, I would personally be responsible for everything that happened bad in my beat if I didn't go to that call. So it's the same as the duty to respond versus, so yeah, that's, so the Supreme Court shifted that liability. Even though the subject may be a danger to self or others, law enforcement and you guys are not responsible for his actions. He is. They are. And so, we do what we can to mitigate it, but in the end, the courts have said we're not responsible for it. So our protocol in Southwest Washington, it started because of Glenn v. Washington. I mean, once that happened, we looked at it and said, yeah, we can't keep doing what we're doing. One, the courts have said so, and it's just bad thing. So, again, this goes over what happened, but yeah, so Portland uses a very interesting way of dealing with it. Their CDMHP actually rides around in a police car with a specially trained officer. And so when they get that call, it's referred back to them. And so EMS, police, everybody walk away, but they say, hey, you guys ought to go check on this guy or talk to him. So, and they call that the Project Respond. But yeah, they have a mobile mental crisis officer paired with the mental health worker. And that's a great model. In 2013, CRESA rewrote the directive. So you notice in progress is still a priority 2, or just occurred a priority 3, threats priority 3, and then a referral is priority 5. So EMS may never see any of these. So this is the beginning of the protocol Dr. Whitworth was talking about. So a call is made to 911 from the people, whether it's third party, by us, or the subject themselves. It is either immediately sent over to crisis. So if somebody calls up and says, I feel like killing myself, it goes to crisis, as opposed to, hey, I feel like killing myself and I got a gun to my head. that might, in progress or something. So we might get sent, maybe. But once it goes to crisis, they do their things. They might directly call crisis, either by us or obviously even through you guys. If it's resolved, talk through the crisis, we're done. That call never goes anywhere. So there's a record of the call, CAD and everything else, but crisis has taken care of it. If they cannot resolve it, or the suicide is in progress or just occurred, comes back to 911, and then 911 goes through its typical triage dispatch process. So this is what it looked like. Suicidal subject threats, and there's the crisis line. Somebody calls up and says, hey, I'm kind of having that moment. I'm about to tip over the edge. Here you go. We're going to transfer you directly to crisis. Call is created, and it's cleared. So this is how a majority of the calls are being handled. So, and it's cleared right there. Suicide or organic mental health. So, and then suicide, and that's how the call is cleared, as a suicidal referral. If we get through all of that process, comes back to 911, and they cannot resolve the problem, it may be simple as they called the guy on the phone and he didn't pick up. And so crisis sends it back to law enforcement. Or, they talked through it and crisis just couldn't resolve his issue that night, and he still really, really wants to kill himself that night. So it comes to law enforcement. So what do we do? First of all, our objectives is safety. Ours, yours, then theirs. And then the whole protocol was designed to provide us some decision-making points on how to handle this. So we've talked a little bit about the priorities of life model and what is it. So basically, when dealing with a suicidal call, or for us, really, any call, we go off the model of priorities of life. And so, as you see, this is listed. Hostages and victims are first, innocent bystanders, police first responders, suspects, and subjects. So basically, this is the risk versus reward chart. So, if somebody is holding a hostage, we will risk a lot for the reward of separating the hostage and the hostage taker. Same as innocents. If there are innocents in the line of fire, we will risk more to make them safe, and then comes us and you guys. So, so what you have is, absent all of those, that pretty much leaves the suspects and the subjects. If they are barricaded in their home by themselves with suicidal ideation, they're probably going to be left there, if we've provided them every resource that we have available. Talk to them on the phone, attempt to engage them. Do you have a phone? Could you call crisis? Would you like to talk with crisis? So, factors to consider. Again, number one for us, has a crime been committed, and what is the crime? So, as I've said before, there's a huge difference between a guy barricaded in his house with any type of weapon saying he's going to kill himself, as opposed to the guy walking down Main Street, Vancouver, wielding a sword or a knife or a gun, saying that he just wants to kill himself. Clearly we have a public's interest, we have a state's interest in one, whereas clearly there's not a state's interest in the other. It is still our job to make everybody safe, so we would probably have to intervene in that situation. So, and believe it or not, there actually are crimes that are associated with that. He could be arrested for brandishing, he could be, so there's things that we could do. So that's the other thing. If you call the police, expecting them to put them on a hold, and they look at the totality of the circumstances, don't be surprised if they may end up going to jail, if they can articulate a crime. Is the subject alone, or are there others in the house? Is the subject at home at another location? What's the relationship with that location? Are they outdoor or a public location? As I said before, there's huge state's interest once they get out there amongst the public. Suicidal threats been made? Have the threats to others? To whom? Does he have the means to carry out? You know, my favorite. I am going to jump off a bridge. Where do you live? In the desert of Arizona. There ain't no bridges in Arizona. Good luck with that. So, phrase, if the police come, I will kill them and myself. Are there any weapons involved? Residential history, subject history. Obviously, we have a lot of subject history on that young man. So, you know, we know how to deal with them. Are there extenuating, aggravating circumstances? Fired from the job, relationship. Is the subject intoxicated? So, what is our guidelines? We do respond to all suicidal calls. Means a deputy, a sergeant, somebody will look at every one of those calls. Decision to engage, limit the risk. If it's been through, once it comes to law enforcement, if it is sent back to law enforcement, we do something with it. We look at it. So, whether the decision to engage, limit the response, or just simply disengage is based on all of these known dangers or other circumstances.
Let me expand a little bit on and repeat what I said for the crowd. Is it possible for you to get a call back, and after you probably answer the question as well, is it possible for you to get a suicidal call back and there's a decision made not to respond to that?
Absolutely.
Correct. When he says respond, it should say address or deal
Yeah.
with.
We may not physically go to their house. We may simply look at those circumstances, and at a supervisor's, you know, level, a decision is made. We are just, and that's why I say, you know, the decision to engage, limit the response, or just simply disengage.
Essentially triage it at that point as well.
A supervisor will triage it depending on and you know, when we talk about each situation is different, we may respond to this 14-year-old this way today, but tomorrow may be different. I mean, the same, so it's just, it depends on all loads and history. Did we have a shooting, or, I mean, is it what's going on? And protocol is having a very difficult time, just so you know, when we have our meetings. They don't understand why a suicidal isn't a priority for law enforcement. They just, and we're trying to work through that on our meetings, so.
See, and it goes against the grain of what EMS wants to do as far as helping people. You know, whether it's a medical problem or helping them through their crisis. You know, what the courts have said is that the tools we use can't be used to help them through this crisis. So, again, the decisions made on the priority of life model. Following actions can be considered. Is there anybody with the subject that can become a hostage or a victim? Law enforcement should attempt to separate them. If they're unwilling to separate or the subject is alone, consider disengagement. So, you know, hey, my husband's suicidal and he's got a whatever. You should leave the house. Leave him alone. Oh, I don't want to. Can't guarantee your safety. Oh, and he says that if the police come, he's going to kill them too. Well, then maybe we should send the fire department because everybody loves them. So, yeah, so you can see that, you know, what the courts are saying is, you know, even the wife calling 911 or the person says, yeah, he just wants to kill himself. Was he threatening you? No, he just wants to kill himself. You should leave. I don't want to. And that's your decision. So, attempt to determine if the subject's armed in a public place or is a risk to innocent bystanders. There again, that raises that bar of state's interest and protection. Subject in a public place, attempt to limit the movement, less lethal options. So, doesn't appear to risk an attempt to contain them, negotiate, see if they're willing to receive help, and then consider disengagement. Determine if they're a threat to officers or first responders. Be aware of suicide by cop. You know, years ago when I first started, I had a boss that said, hey, that's a service we provide. Court said you're out of business. You know, court said, yeah, you just can't do that. You know, you need to be aware of that. And so that kind of came back around circle of that. You shouldn't be placing yourself in a position that creates this opportunity to use a high level of force if there was no mitigating circumstances to create that. okay? So the, bank robber, I shouldn't use a bank robber, the dude that's driving away in a car and I want to arrest him, I probably shouldn't jump in front of the car, because now I've just placed myself in mortal danger. Then I have to pull out my gun, shoot the driver. See how I've created that situation? Or if I walk into somebody's home and they're barricaded and they're armed and it creates this confrontation. So I can't create that on my own. Doesn't appear to be a threat by others. Disengage. Attempts may be made by CIT officers, and we're all going through CIT training again. I get to go for another 8 hours tomorrow. So, we are trying to keep up on, what it takes to talk to people. So, but, and I think Aaron said it, oftentimes they have to weigh our presence there, just our mere presence, as potentially jacking these folks up. This whole uniform comes with a certain amount of, why are the cops here? Yeah, do not force a confrontation.
So John, CIT?
Crisis intervention training, basically helps us be able to recognize when somebody is truly in a mental health crisis, as opposed to making an absolute competent decision. And then just how to talk to them, and
Something that will probably be coming in.
yeah.
And Mark, just so we're having a 40-hour, I teach it, we have it 40 hours every year, and there's a Senate bill in the state of Washington. It's passed now, it started January. Every officer has to have 2 hours of mental health or crisis training every year, 8 hours every law enforcement officer by 2021, and then 25%, they want to raise it to 50% of all police agents, your number of officers have to have the 40-hour certification. As BPD, we're going to put everyone through it. It'll take a while, but everybody will have the 40-hour certification. So I know, like Jason just made the statement about the new officers, everybody's got a ton of new officers on because we're just attrition. And some of them had a few hours up at the academy, but they really don't know. So I would recommend, I think I can speak for the sheriff as well, if you guys have, somebody says, oh, 16 years old, we can't do anything, or you have a problem or something's not going right, please let us know. And it's not to get the officer in trouble, but we would like to educate them and give them those tools so that bad information isn't getting continued on their shift or something's happened. So please let either whoever the agency know, or if you have a question, please contact us so we can get that nipped in the bud. But CIT is crisis, and like John was talking about, it's not mental health anymore. They're trying to switch everything over to crisis.
Right.
Because somebody comes home and finds spouse in bed with brother or sister or whomever.
Yeah.
They're not in crisis, or they're not mentally ill. They're in crisis. And I even think DMHPs are getting switched over to crisis response workers rather than designated mental health professionals, or even changing the names. So.
Yeah, because we found, there's a lot of people that rather talk with a crisis specialist than a mental health specialist or even a cop. So this is key, and this is why I said that this is one of the important things. Do not create a special relationship. This is what creates the biggest problem for us. As I said, Supreme Court has said we don't have any duty to respond. I create a duty once I create the special relationship, okay? I liken this to once you've created a special relationship with that person, you can't abandon them. If I create a special relationship with a person, anything that happens beyond that, I could own. Trust me, ma'am, I'm going to take care of everything, and he's going to be just fine. My partner just shot him. Oh, that's bad. So yeah, creating a special relationship. So even something else that I'm here to help. I'll do the best I can. We've done everything we can. So again, so this goes back to engage versus. So once we go through our protocol, we either going to disengage and see what happens, or we're going to engage. It may lead to a custody, which is transport to the hospital, and it works one of two ways. So unfortunately, just like Jason says, by the time we get to here, these are the worst of the worst of the worst cases. Everything else has been filtered and triaged out and dealt someplace else. These are the ones that clearly no one else can deal with. And so that's probably leading to some of the frustration is because the cases that we have are the worst cases. So I'm not going to go over engage versus disengage. Basically, I showed you earlier on why we would engage versus why we would disengage. So, but in all cases, law enforcement should attempt to provide with the resources. So we call them. Do you have a phone? You can call crisis. If you have any other problem, you can call 911. They will connect you with crisis. So, so this is the last. Does it really work? Okay. What happens through this process? So I share this with you because this was actually my call. So the actual call, 911 call, September 30, 2015. This was at Chuck's Produce on Highway 99. Male subject on a phone with crisis, somewhere around the building. He's going to hang himself, is homeless, calling back, sees the officer. I actually responded. Need some help? I'll respond. Drove into the parking lot. He calls 911. Yeah, I can see the officer. Unknown where he is, but supposedly he's in the bushes. Got a gray hoodie. Checked around. Says he would become violent if somebody approaches him. Okay, have a nice day. I'm here to help, but if you want to fight, I got to go. So I did. I cleared the call. So about 2 hours later, now James is on the line, says he's going to kill himself, has a knife. He will use the knife if anybody shows up. Admits feeling violent towards the officers. Anybody else? Anybody like want to run in and see James right now? He insists he has the knife. Advised crisis that we aren't going to contact him if he has a weapon and states he intends to cause harm with it. That came from the sergeant. I said, hey, Sergeant, what do you want me to do about this? And he says, we are not going if he's on the phone saying, I have a knife and I'm going to use it. Okay? About 7 o'clock in the morning, they found James dead. Hung himself on the sidewalk at Chuck's. So, unfortunate. It's horrible. It's tragic. But did we provide him every opportunity to resolve the issue without creating undue danger to either myself or an EMS crew? You know, he talked with crisis. He had that opportunity. In my opinion, he was trying to force a confrontation. He you know, after 2 calls to 911 and frustrated, he finally committed suicide by himself without any assistance. And while this is the poorest of outcomes, you know, no one else was hurt.
So Shields, in that beginning of the case, when he's down at the grocery store, you know, where was he at with the knife?
See, he didn't say anything about the knife earlier. He just wanted help.
Later on, he said, I'm still at the grocery store with this knife. I mean, was there a state interest in that?
There's not a state's interest in protecting himself from himself.
I think he's like being in public by the grocery store.
We have to weigh that. Here's the key.
He didn't say where he was at.
Right.
So was he down the creek bed?
Yeah. Here's the key to that. It was 2 a.m. and there was the store was closed. The parking lot was empty. There was no one there. So yes, that did come into effect. But when you look at it that way, at 2, 3 in the morning. So.
We had Sergeant called me at home and said we've got the ISAC bridge shut down for the guy with
The guy with the knife, yeah.
I said, have you negotiated? Yeah, we've been here an hour, negotiators. He's saying he doesn't want anything. And I said, open it back up and leave.
Yep.
And the sergeant was like, what do you mean? And I said, you need to shut it down and go. And they got across the bridge, and the guy, and he was doing the, I own the bridge, I own, doing that kind of stuff. And as soon as they got by Jansen Beach, opened it up, he was called and goes, all right, I'll go to the hospital. And that's a good outcome, obviously.
Yeah.
But Portland was furious. So Portland still closes the bridges down, and we'll take that person into custody where we've chosen not to. And we're not under a consent decree. There's some other different things. So there is some different philosophies in case you guys are, I don't know if you go across the bridge, but or when you're on those borderlines, but we chose to open it back up and left. So we will leave those.
But again, I guess I'm confused because that's the I-5 bridge. We just said I-5 road. You know, he's owning the bridge. That seems like state.
Oh no, this guy he was talking about the Salmon Creek Bridge. So. Her guy was on the I-5 bridge.
Right. On the bridge, and that sounds like what we were talking about earlier, he's in I-5 traffic, we need to get him out of there immediately.
Well,
He was, I think he was dangling over the side or,
Well, he was just, yeah, he was on the side.
Yeah.
And we couldn't articulate that he was a danger to the public.
right.
He wasn't stupid enough to get in traffic.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But my sergeant kept saying, what if he jumps in front of a car, what if he hurts, and I said, well, we can let it all night, we need
Yeah.
to go, and we went. And it
At
was
some
like
point,
that.
we say we're not responsible
But
for your
if
actions.
he would have done something bad, we would have all got sued. You have to, I mean, sometimes
Yeah.
there's just you're screwed either way, but you do the best you can. So.
See, Drew and I have the benefit of we've pretty much been sued by every patient we've ever touched. So, mostly because we create our patients. But so, I mean, in summary, the biggest thing is courts are leaning towards less law enforcement intrusion into people's lives without true just cause. And so, you know, the mental health, you know, that unfortunately where we used to be the catch-all, EMS is now becoming a lot of the catch-all. So, but for us, again, it is what's the state's interest versus the amount of intrusion in their lives. And then the use of force is being narrowed in scope and very clearly defined boundaries on defining what is reasonable and not reasonable. We can't separate ourselves from our state function and community caretaking. And yes, we may involuntarily commit a subject for evaluation, but I say we shouldn't force them because there will be cases where force can be used, but that officer has to be able to articulate the reasonableness and the justification for that force. So, and then again, our primary function is the safety of innocent persons, responders, ourselves, and then the subjects. So we don't create we're trying not to create the problem, we're trying to mitigate it. So, all right, that went a little long, but that's why we took the one less lethal out, because we kind of thought it would. This was more important than that. We'll do that on another day. But so, any questions? Oh, there's probably lots of questions. Any questions that you think I could answer?
Hey, Mark, can you get me hooked up? Yeah. Mark, can you get me hooked up here? Okay, I've got a couple of, so I want to thank everybody from law enforcement who came, and John particularly.
Oh, yeah. Lieutenant McNicholas, thank you for coming. That was fantastic, actually.
And Mark and I will be continuing the conversation on Thursday because we do our crisis. We have at least 2 meetings a month that we're dealing with the crisis on the student threat assessment and then the crisis intervention team. And part of the crisis, I just confirmed, part of the crisis intervention training, the CIT training for law enforcement includes dealing with excited delirium. So, and that's where we can interface very well with law enforcement because we have the tools. And people have asked me how do I define excited delirium? Excited delirium to me is extreme mental and agitation, including physical agitation, that requires your intervention with chemical restraint, and you cannot start an IV on that patient because he is so resistant. You have to put all your medication IM. That's good enough for me to be excited delirium. And that's why we've come up with the drugs that you use intramuscularly. I would much prefer to have you do the psychiatric medication by IV. But if the patient doesn't allow it, that's what it is. So, I got a couple of cases. These are not psychiatric cases, but I think they're important for our management of other patients. Here is a Here's a little drug issue. This is a patient with low back pain, doing heavy workouts the day before. The mute is on.
Yeah.
No, the mute wasn't on. Oh. Okay. He was working out at the gym, quit his workout because his back began hurting, and by about 7 p.m., pain so bad he couldn't get out of bed. Couldn't ambulate. Only position of comfort was fetal position, curled up in bed. Couldn't get up. EMS administered patient IV fentanyl and ketamine for pain control. Gee, then the patient became quite somnolent, had a GCS of 8 to 9, almost to the point of being intubated. Placed on a tarp, transported, slowly becoming more alert, very confused, very drowsy. So here was his pain scale, 10 of 10. GCS initially was normal, blood pressure 142. Got fentanyl 50 mics, and got ketamine 250 milligrams. What's your limit for pain control? Quick. 0.3 milligrams with a max of 25. So this is 10 times the dose. This is a dose. Well, this is the dose the same dose we use for intubation. Pulse ox stayed good. CO2 value was good. You know, ketamine makes you breathe. It makes ventilation's good. But look at the blood pressure. This did everything the ketamine is supposed to do. Blood pressure went up. Remember, it's got a little catecholamine release. Pulse went up. Respirations went up. Blood pressure went up to 179 and coming down. Well, as you got to the hospital, well, we've got clearly a medication error. The medic recognized it about the time the guy went to a GCS of 8. Then the patient's waking up, but he, quote, felt lost and confused. I certainly bet he did. And he felt lost, and he had nystagmus, so, you know, overdose of medication, psychotropic meds, and anesthesias, and alcohol, and Dilantin is, you know, too much of it, and you develop nystagmus. Now, he cleared very nicely. He stayed a while, cleared very nicely during the ED stay, and he was perfectly normal on discharge, including absolutely no back pain. And I'm sure the ER doc would have loved to take him credit for it if he gave the dose, but this is not the right dose. So so for acute pain control, first of all, that's a piddly little amount of fentanyl. 50 mics for a normal sized guy, that's not very much. And to adjunctive for pain control, now if the guy was really having back spasms, I would have probably gone with Versed as the adjunctive. But he wasn't complaining about it, he just had back pain. No one really had back spasms. And I think the ketamine is a really nice thing to use, but I think I would have at least gotten 100 mics of fentanyl in him to see whether or not it was doing okay. Now, in Portland, they will not even let you use ketamine unless you've already used 200 mics of fentanyl. And I've said that's nonsense. That's not adjunctive. That's, you know, totally sedative at that point after you've already had 200 mics of fentanyl. So I think adjunctive, you want to add it to it as you need it, and I would say after you don't have any results from a reasonable dose of fentanyl. What's a reasonable dose of fentanyl? 50 times 2. Now, so Fentanyl you give in increments, titrated for pain relief, and then the ketamine adjunctively 0.3 milligram per kilo, max of 25 for relief for a single time period. Now, can you repeat that? Probably shouldn't. Now, it's a little bit different for prolonged extrication for the reach and treat kind of thing. You can go for you can ask and talk to medical control. You can get a bit more for the anticipated painful extrications. Don't forget, you've got Zofran for nausea and Versed for muscle spasms. So, but that's your, now, as a sedating agent, your dose is 2 milligrams per kilo, because we want them to have a GCS of 8 or less. All right. Now, this is a quick one. This is an interesting code 3 on a burn. This is a 7-year-old male who's running around an open slash fire, rural residential property. Family says he saw the kid fall into the fire and then jump out. They think he was in the fire about 3 seconds. Complains of pain, complains of being cold. He's about 15 kilo. Father is hosing him with a garden hose. Eyelashes, eyebrows are burned, front part of patient's hair, inside of mouth, nares are clean, no noted burn indication, neck, 2nd-degree burn, skin peeling, no stridor, chest equal, normal breath tones, anterior trunk, not truck, anterior trunk covered totally with 2nd-degree burn, skin peeling off down to belt line. They estimate he's got perhaps some 3rd-degree burns on left anterior thigh. Upper extremities, normal 2nd-degree burn, left arm, hand to shoulder, right hand is 2nd-degree burn. Blood sugar is 143. They estimated total BSA of 35. The hospital said BSA was, I think, 25%. So, I mean, that's certainly, he's qualified to go to a manual. So, they gave him some fentanyl, 50. Now, the 7-year-old gets 50 mics of fentanyl, and that giant, that normal-sized guy with the back pain got 50 mics. Okay, so I think 50 is good for this one. Patient says he feels okay now, pain-wise. At least he didn't get 250 of ketamine. Life flight arrives, patient transfer completed, transferred to the manual burn unit. Now, I want to note here, everybody decided that his breathing was okay, and everything's okay, and even life flight. So nobody intubated this kid. Nobody thought it was necessary. That's fine. So they thought 20% burns. You notice that first line in the next sentence, the first bullet, now extubated, so they did have to intubate the patient because he had developed some respiratory compromise. He gets supplemental nutrition because his nutritional goals are a little high now because of the burn. Had limitation of getting PT. He was doing Wii boxing and bowling to improve his upper extremity coordination. He's got lots of burns. He's going to get some scars, but things are settling down. So it's a good case.
Was he intubated because of respiratory compromise?
Yeah, at the ED.
It was respiratory compromise and edema, because
Yeah.
remember he had burns on his neck.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
understand that, I didn't know if
Yeah,
he had.
edema of the throat, and then some. He obviously had to inhale some, getting a little stuff. But everybody, the medic at the scene didn't think he needed to be intubated, and Life Flight didn't think. So decision was made after the fact as things developed at the hospital. Otherwise, we would have heard about it because the burn center is very, very good at yelling at us if we don't bring patients intubated who should be intubated. They didn't yell, no.
How aggressive, Dr. Whitmer, would you get with someone, say on that patient, say his nares, say, or singed,
Well, if you had evidence of nasal burns and any oral, edema, I would. I'd get any bit of stridor, anything, I wouldn't hesitate. Of course, now the question is, he's got enough burns around his neck, how much edema is he going to get? If it's third degree, a lot. If it's second degree, probably not. So you use your judgment. I hate to tell you this, but 7 or 8 year olds don't have a lot of nasal hair, so you can't really burn it. So if you're looking for burn, singed nasal hair, it's not going to find it. Nasal hair begins when you get a little bit older, and then it gets even worse as you get really older, along with your ears. Okay, case 3. Patient called 911 45 minutes before a call of chest pain and feeling of racing heart. Has a racing heart several times before in the past. Says this is different because of the chest pain. I got lightheaded and drenched with sweat. Rates to chest pain is 3 of 10 on arrival. Rating the left shoulder. Sharp mid-sternal pain during transport. Rating the left shoulder. Let's see. 0 of 10 with 1 nitroglycerin spray. Deny shorter breath, nausea, other complaints. So pain scale 3 of 10. Pale, diaphragmatic warm. Supraventricular tachycardia. It's called. Volume infused. So IV. Got some adenosine, 12 lead said supraventricular tachycardia. Got some adenosine, 12 lead, da-da-da. Okay. So, adenosine. Okay. Now what do we got here? So this is after he was called supraventricular tachycardia. Looks, how fast is that? Yeah. So not super fast, but it seems to get a conversion with the adenosine. Now you've got this. This is what developed afterwards. This was called a STEMI. Called a STEMI. Now, the interesting thing about this STEMI is that this patient was brought in for a long, had a long transport time, comes from way out there. I think we had, 10, 12 leads that look exactly like this. And this is now, it's slowing down. What do you see, guys? Yeah, definitely an LVH. And what's that V1 look like to you? That looks like a wide complex deep S wave. I think this is a left bundle branch or just borderline to left bundle branch block. And you've got certainly LVH criteria. Put 1 and 5 together, or more importantly, 2 and 6 together, you got a lot more than 35. So this is a STEMI mimic. And this keeps looking the same all the way through. So we got aspirin, got a STEMI alert. Okay. Case 4. Well, the medic called it a STEMI. And there's ST segment elevation in V1 and V2. Although I don't see really any ST, there's minimal ST segment elevation, but you can't call ST segment elevation with LVH and with left bundle branch block.
So the common verbiage in that, and we see it all the time, it's either consider lateral or consider inferior infarct.
Yep.
That's what the machine reads, and it reads it every time.
Yep. Yeah. And the machine is always, and that's why we teach you to overread the machine too.
So, case 4, he has chest pain, burning in his stomach, shortness of breath. Patient's daughter says he's at Kaiser Sunnyside for a 5-way bypass. Increasing confusion, speaking in full sentences, then 12 lead looks like this. Damn, doesn't that look like the last one? It is. It's the same guy. Yes. It's the same guy, and it's called the STEMI again. Now, remember, this guy's just had bypass surgery too. So he's going to have some ST segment changes, but his EKG hasn't changed. He's still got a left bundle branch block and LVH. So he's called the STEMI again. Now, happily, let's see, at this time, this is in the morning. This one is in the night. So this one they triggered this cath lab. This one is in the morning, so, they didn't trigger the cath lab, but, or he would have been here anyway, so not a big deal. Now,
It wasn't the same medic, was it?
no.
Now that they knew each other.
Yeah. So, at any rate, here are your mimickers. And, okay, now, I think you guys read EKGs real well, and I do expect that we can have up to, I expect a 20% overread for safety for the patient, okay? The problem is almost all of our read, and we're averaging 5 to 6 false STEMI activations per month, so that's about 25%, maybe 30%. And it's always the same thing. It's either left bundle branch block or left ventricular hypertrophy, or both, or a we're missing the other big one in here, which is a paced rhythm. Because a paced rhythm, by definition, is going to give you a left bundle branch pattern. And versus left bundle branch, you can read, remember, you can read acute myocardial infarction in the presence of a left bundle branch block using the Scarbosa criteria, but for most of you, don't bother. Because first of all, it's very rare, it's very uncommon.
Scarbosa is only about 40% specific too.
Yeah, and it's really, really the only one that really makes it, 90% of the, is whether you have, it's a 90% correlation if you have concurrence. But so far, only 1 or 2 medics have been able to have the presence of mind to do concurrence. And there is no concurrence. If you have a paced rhythm, concurrence doesn't count, because that's a false left bundle branch. You're not going to get concurrence in that one. So you just give it up. So left bundle branch block, paced rhythms, and LVH are the big 3. So these other ones, acute pericarditis, that's very uncommon now, but you see ST segment elevation. If you can't have ST segment elevation in anterior, septal, lateral, and inferior, because that means you're dead, or you're about to be, because nobody has a total heart attack and is sitting there talking to you. Ventricular aneurysm, very unusual. Benign early repolarization, that's a hard one. I'm happy to have you overread that one. And then put it in context. Now, this guy was in context. He was having chest pain. we get a whole bunch of STEMI activations because you appropriately did an EKG, a 12 lead on a patient because they had a problem. They fell down and were unconscious. You happened to get a 12 lead on them. And actually once, just this last week or two, the 12 lead was positive, and the guy actually did have a heart attack. That's why he fell down. But we didn't do anything about it in the long run. I mean, they did do a STEMI activation, but they did a trauma/STEMI activation. Yeah, which is it? So put it in context. If you have a little old person who appears to be septic in a nursing home, and you happen to do a 12 lead, which you should, and it looks like it's got ST elevation, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a STEMI. You're not going to do a STEMI activation on a septic, unconscious, previously demented nursing home resident. We're not going to call it. Now, say, Dr. Whitwer, how can you make us make all these decisions? First, we have to decide whether someone's suicidal and whether we want to bring them in. And now you want to tell whether they've got a 12 lead and and we're going to do a semi-active. Don't worry about it, because soon that will be a thing of the past, because we are about to go to the Pulsera system, and you don't have to worry about what that is. You're going to be educated on it by your own agencies. But you'll be sending a picture of the 12 lead to the ED by this system. The first person to be notified is the ED physician, who will look at this and say, yeah, I agree, this is a STEMI. I'm going to call the STEMI team. Or say, well, I don't think so. Let's wait until we see when they get to the ED.
So it's all going to be exactly the same, except for he's going to be able to activate the
Yep,
cath lab.
exactly the same. I want you to call it a STEMI and send that in through the Pulsera, and then if there's an upgrade, if the EKG changes en route and it's huge ST segment, send that one. We have a lot of times where you know that this is a coronary event, an ACS event, but your EKG is really fuzzy at that time. That's why you do the second EKG or the third EKG, not necessarily 10 or 12 on the way to the department. But I think Camus used to have the record of about 6, which was good because it proved it on the 6th one. Actually, it proved it on the 4th one, but that was another story. Okay. Any other questions for me? We scooted right along today.
Somebody let AMR, this was 3 hours.
Yeah. Well, it's supposed to be 3 hours.